A CBS News YouGov poll for CBS DFW explored a number of topics, including the Uvalde school shooting and gun rights, also the governor's race and Greg Abbott's response. Anthony Salvanto, CBS News Director of Election Surveys, joins us now. And Anthony, welcome again. And let's start with the governor's race.
How are you, Jack? Great to talk to you. So the contest at this point stands in Abbott's favor at 49-41. And there's really a couple of perhaps very simple explanations for that. One is that Abbott has the support of Republicans, and there just are more Republicans saying they're planning to vote in this contest, as is typically the case in Texas. The other part of this is the extent to which this race perhaps might become nationalized. And even though the governor's overall job approval rating is net negative, people would still vote for him over O'Rourke. And part of that is that they believe, Texans believe, that the state of Texas is doing better than the nation overall, that the Texas economy is doing better than the nation's overall. Another aspect of this, Jack, is that the governor gets relatively higher approval ratings in the state than President Joe Biden does. So to the extent that this race is nationalized, and perhaps all midterms are in some respects reflections on the president, even though it's a governor's race, that may also be having an impact, Jack.
So when you look at potential campaign strategy, what do you see, given the economy here in Texas and that many Texans believe are more upbeat about what's going on here in Texas than they are the rest of the nation, and given the fact of President Biden's unpopularity here in the state?
Well, I think that's an important factor. One, because we have all indications that the economy is going to be the top, if not one of the top issues, come November. So if you figure that people in the state of Texas think that the state's economy is doing better than the nation's overall, as our polling and finds out that they do, then that becomes perhaps an advantage for the incumbent governor. The second part of this is that to the extent to which any midterm is in some respects a reflection of the popularity of a sitting president, especially a first-term president, well, in that case, even though it's a governor's race, you might find a nationalization or a national effect in this race, and that also could potentially accrue to Abbott's advantage.
You know, we have seen a lot of tragic events recently here in the state of Texas. Obviously, the Uvalde shooting was horrific, and I'm wondering what impact do you think that may have on the governor's overall ratings?
Well, the governor gets net negative approval for handling the shooting, the events in the wake of the shooting. You know, having said that, one of the things that stood out to me, Jack, was the overwhelming number, at more than 8 in 10 Texans, who said that law enforcement, in their view, could have done more to stop it. And also the overwhelming number of Texans who feel that it's important to get to the bottom of what happened in that event. So I think there's a lot more to watch here, and what we're clearly hearing from Texans and the public in this study is that people do want to get to the bottom of it and do want more information, Jack.
And let me ask you on that note, because we're hearing it from people in Uvalde and all over Texas. There are a number of investigations going on right now, and there's a lot of concern that the findings, the truth, will not come out altogether, and that a lot of it will be swept under the rug. So how important do you think these kinds of polls are as far as getting that word out to the people who control these investigations, and whether that information does get out there?
Well, look, one of the important things we always talk about polling is giving the public a voice, a collective voice. And to the extent that all public officials are accountable to the public ultimately, we think hearing that voice is always very important in a general sense. But I think the more perhaps immediate part of this is the number of people who are still concerned about the prospects of more mass shootings. And that stands out in the concern of the public as well. So you start to look at going forward, what happens? There's a sizable number of Texans who say that the events, the tragedy in Uvalde, has made them at least somewhat more likely to consider stricter gun measures, gun control measures, or changes to gun policy. So that's one implication that could come out of public opinion going forward, Jack.
And what measures do people here in Texas favor in response to Uvalde, at least as far as the guns are concerned?
Yeah, one that stands out is background checks, and that gets strong approval both from Democrats and Republicans. One of the reasons for that is that anytime we poll on measures that would go towards the people who would ostensibly be buying or using a firearm, you do see more Republicans a little bit relatively more in favor of those kinds of measures, along with Democrats. So it looks like from a policy standpoint, that could be a place to find common ground. By contrast, you see Republicans in particular are much more reticent to support measures that would ban or limit the use or the purchase of weapons in particular, Jack.
And that would seem to align with what we saw with how gun owners feel about these policies, no?
That is correct. Oftentimes you see measures that go to the person, whether it be background checks or at least nationally for many for red flag laws. You might see more support there, more so than measures that go to the weapons themselves. One thing to note is that, in particular for background checks, the state of Texas looks very much like what we find in our national polling, with support for that. So in that respect, Texans are very much like the rest of the country, Jack.
And then I know you also asked Texans what they feel would do the most help in preventing mass shootings. And a lot of people seem to really think mental health screenings.
Yeah, that's right. When people look ahead and sort of think about what kinds of policies could potentially prevent tragedies like this in the future, mental health screenings, mental health changes to policy is one of the things that stands out with more than 6 in 10. One of the things that we want to emphasize is that there are some differences in how partisans view these kinds of measures. For Republicans in particular, those kinds of screenings, I should add, also better mental health screenings, I should say, are one of the top things that they cite as potentially helping to stop things. For Democrats, it is background checks, and it is some of those measures as well. So a little bit of difference there, but again, you do see that partisan common ground, if you will, on a lot of these measures too, Jack.
Well, I know that there is right now a lot of discussion. We've had state legislature committees at the state capitol have been holding hearings on this. The governor has asked them to come up with recommendations to go forward. And now a lot of people are wondering, will there be a special session called, or will they just wait until the regular session, which starts up again in January? There's a lot of pressure by Democrats to start and get this going in a special session before then. What do you make of, the fact that this is still being considered? They want to see all this information and the debate going forward.
So some of the top answers that Democrats, which you mentioned in particular, think could do more are more red flag laws, better enforcement of current laws, as well as the background checks that we discussed. And, in that respect, Jack, there is some commonality there with Republicans. So Texas Republicans are going to look at better mental health screening, but also more religion and faith in people's lives is one thing that they think would help. Again, talking about the person as opposed to the weapon. And then also more police and more armed guards in public places is something that Republicans in the poll told us that they think would do a lot to help keep people safer and help prevent some of these. So again, you see some commonalities between Democrats and Republicans here, and maybe that's a way forward when it comes to public policy, but then you also see these differences in at least what a lot of these partisans think could do a lot as a way forward, Jack.
And then, the other question becomes, does the governor want to does he want to call a special session while he's also trying to run for governor? And I'm wondering what the potential impact could be on the race.
Yeah, I think the thing to watch here is the degree to which people place this at the top of their issues priority list and whether any elected official starts to meet that. You know, we've discussed that the economy is very important. We know that the overturn of Roe v. Wade is going to be top of mind, or at least it is right now for a lot of Texans as it is in the country. But does gun policy become the key or a key issue in this race? That, I think, is something that we'll have to track, and as you and I do more of these polls, we'll watch those numbers. I do know, however, that in many cases, gun policy is something on which we see a lot of so-called single-issue voters, voters who say, and this has come from other studies, but it's a fairly reliable finding over time, who say that this is a policy on which an elected official must agree with them in order to earn their vote, and everything else falls by the wayside. So that's another thing to watch as we go forward, whether for a lot of these single-issue voters we see this come up on either side of the gun debate, Jack.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see, Anthony. And we saw, unfortunately, this week another tragedy, this one in San Antonio, where 53 migrants died in a hot tractor trailer. And what did the poll tell us? What do Texans think would help a lot with the situation at the border?
This is, important to note here, Jack. We did the polling, obviously, before this tragedy. So this is a general sense, in principle, from the public. More enforcement at the border was top among many other items that people think could be helpful. So more enforcement at the border. Also, many feel that setting up more facilities to help migrants or potential migrants at the border could help the situation there. We also found that more judges to hear asylum cases was something that people heard, in particular for Democrats, said that could help alleviate the situation from the border, at the border. So we gave people a range of potential items, and one of the things that stood out to me from the general pattern of that data is that there are many things that people think could help a lot or some, and there's no one thing that people think is the singular solution. So you really, from a public policy standpoint, want to take away from that people want to see many things deployed, many efforts here to help ameliorate the situation there, Jack.
All right, Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate all of your insight and your help with the CBS News YouGov poll for CBS DFW. Thank you so much.